Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I am delighted and pleased to introduce Gigi Alcock to you this afternoon. I was inspired by the presentation that Gigi did through the Alec Hogg Biz News podcast a couple of months ago, and I thought that that would be a good addition to our spring conference lineup, and I was delighted that he agreed to speak and assist us, especially in line with the SAPEX Supply Small Business Hub project initiative that we started last year. Gigi is going to be speaking on last metre logistics in the informal economy and the scale, opportunity and challenges of the informal Kasinomic, I think I said that right, economy. He's an author, speaker, entrepreneur, and is based in South Africa. He was born white in apartheid South Africa and was raised in a mud hut in one of the most poverty-stricken and violent parts of KwaZulu-Natal. His parents raised their two sons in a hut with no running water, electricity, or modern conveniences. And I think this is what's made him the man he is today. He's fluent in Zulu and conversant in a few South African ethnic languages. He's the author of 3 books and a thought leader, commentator on the trends and dynamics of the informal economies and societies which make up a large part of our South African economy. Thank you, Gigi. Over to you. Please feel free to ask any questions or discussion points in the tabs on the right, and remember to rate the presentation at the end. Thanks, everybody.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Claire. I'm just going to pull up my presentation, and you can let me know if you can see it.
Thank you.
Can you see my presentation?
We can, thank you. Can you hear me?
No, I didn't hear you. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk to what I call Kasinomics, and in essence, Kasinomics is the kind of economy of the informal sector. The reason I called it Kasinomics, the word Kasi obviously coming from townships, from Kasi, and it's now become the trendy word to describe the townships and the informal economy. But the reason I called it Kasinomics is that the tendency is that the word informal implies things like unstructured, unsophisticated, small scale, low cost, and so on. And the reality is that this informal economy is generally not any of these elements, and it's a thriving sector and a growing sector, as I'll show you just now. So what I'm going to talk to is that economy, but in line with the theme of the conference, I'm going to be talking about last meter kind of logistics, because it's not last mile in this space, and a lot of time it's last meter. And I'll talk to the scale of this market and the opportunities that are represented in it. Start and kind of frame our thinking around this concept of Kasinomics is that, we often feel like it's a small scale, low income sector. But if you go to downtown Johannesburg, you exit the Gautrain and you walk into the streets of what feels like Lagos, but is downtown Johannesburg, you'll find this young 25-year-old lady who is selling amagwinya or vetkoek in the streets of Johannesburg. And this young lady left Limpopo, came to Johannesburg, couldn't find a job, so decided to sell vetkoek. And she sells 6,000 vetkoek every single day for R1 each, and she sells almost 1,000 rands worth of tea and coffee, polony, cheese slices, and so on. So she turns over around about 6,500 to 7,000 rand a day, and she makes a profit of about 40% on that. And yet we kind of walk past and we feel sorry for her. And she employs 5 people. She employs a nanny to look after her kids, because she starts selling vetkoek at around 2 in the morning and finishes at around 10 in the morning. So she employs a nanny to look after her kids, and she employs her brother and 4 others. So and 3 others. So she employs 5 people and has been doing this for the last 3 or 4 years. So, just even at the lowest level, this is someone on the street selling vet cook. You can just get a sense of the amount of money that she's making. She's making around about 2,000 Rand profit a day. And then on the right-hand side is the hamburger of the townships, what's called a quarter loaf of bread with slap chips and polony and cheese slice. As you can see, it's endorsed by the Heart Foundation and Banting Friendly. Anyway, I was asked to introduce cheese slices into the townships in about 2005 by Parmalat, and I suggested introducing them into the Gorda and the Fair Cook sector, and we managed to build a total sector across cheese slice of about 4 billion Rand a year, and this sector never existed before. And so it just gives you a sense of the potential scale of the sector, just in cheese slices of 4 billion Rand a year. But let's look at some of the other sectors. And generally, when we talk about the townships, people go, "Oh, you mean spaza shops?" And it drives me crazy because, as I'll show you, there's a number of other sectors. But let's just start with spazas. And generally within the spazas, the tendency is to feel like the spazas in the top left is the typical spaza. And these are really the Gussie forecourt, and it's very much like a forecourt. It's a grudge purchase. You've run out of something, you send a kid running down the road to go and buy it, or it's a daily purchase, bread, airtime, and so on. But what has really shaped the sector is what I call spazarettes in the center there, which is these spazarettes are more a supermarket format. They're still slightly informal, but more kind of have this kind of open shelves or aisles. And there's about 30,000 of these spazarettes. And this spazarette sector has dramatically disrupted and challenged the likes of ShopRite, Pick and Pay, and all of those. And I have for many years said this is the future of retail in South Africa, and it continues to grow. We see figures like up to 40 to 50% of shopping trips are now to a spazarette type outlet versus going to a formal retailer as people shop closer to home. But I'll come back to that. And then on the bottom right there is what I call midi wholesalers. These are informal wholesalers, like that Soweto Cash and Carry. It's about 1,000 of them in the country. And these turn over, huge amounts of money. Soweto Cash and Carry turns over around 500,000 Rand a day, 6.5 days a week. So really substantial businesses supplying the spazarette and spaza sector. So as a total sector, you've got 150 billion Rand sector here. Yeah, very dominated by 4 immigrant groups: Somalis, Ethiopians, Pakistanis, and Bangladeshis. An interesting fact is that they also pay around 25 billion Rand a year in rental to South African households, because these immigrants obviously don't own the premises and rent it from a South African. So the next sector is the fast food sector. I mentioned the Gordas, but there's about 50,000 what I call Gussie course fast food or out-of-home food outlets turning over around 90 billion Rand a year. And this is across a range of different foods: shisanyamas, Gordas, amapleti, chicken dust, hard body chicken, and so on. And then over and above these 50,000 outlets is another 45,000 odd licensed taverns and shebeens selling alcohol. And this total sector of both taverns and fast food outlets is almost 100% South African. South Africans understand the food, the cultural dishes that people make. And a very dynamic sector, makes much more margin than the spaza sector in terms of they're making around 40% versus about 10% margin in the spaza sector. Another monster sector is the taxi sector, the ones we know and love. 250,000 taxis turning over more than 50 billion Rand a year. Quite extraordinary, traveling 19 billion kilometers, and an incredibly strong sector in terms of supply of public transport. Kind of alongside the sector is the Bakkie Brigade, and the interesting thing, and talking to distribution and logistics and so, is that a large portion of the of this informal economy is in essence transported and distributed on the back of this kind of bakkie brigade. And the top right there is the fresh produce market in Joburg, and most of the fresh produce markets are very similar to this. And in essence, if a trader wants to go and buy their vegetables to sell, they would take a taxi to the Joburg fresh produce market from, say, Baragwanath taxi rank. They would buy their vegetables, they'd walk outside, and then each one of these bakkies are literally waiting to do deliveries. You would go up to one of them, you'd negotiate a price, and then they would drive you and your vegetables back to the rank where you sell. The same would happen in the wholesale around outside. All of these wholesalers or these bakkies lined up, and the Somali trader will take a taxi to the wholesaler, walk inside, walk out, and hire one of these vehicles. And of course, the big strength of this is that these guys have, they know the townships, the local township people, so you don't need addresses or Google Maps or anything like that. You can see on the left-hand side, this is one of the Bakkie Brigade associations. They call themselves Sizabantu Transport outside a wholesaler in Tembisa. That's the different suburbs in Tembisa, and there's the drivers, and you can WhatsApp the driver if he's not parked outside, and he'll come to you and do your delivery. So a very sophisticated platform, even though it's informal. So when we look, and I haven't got time today to go through all of these different sectors, but there's a huge number of sectors, and it's a multi-sectorial sector, from the spazarets, fast food outlets, the tabletop hawker sector, 500,000 outlets, muti trade, that's herbal and plant-based medicine, 18 billion rand across about 150,000 muti traders. Just the rental of spazas I mentioned, around 25 billion. Over and above that is another 20 billion rand in backroom rental. The taxi sector I mentioned, the hair salons, a 10 billion rand sector across around 50,000 hair salons and 60,000 stylists and home barbers. The Gasi auto trade is huge. Those would be mechanics and panel beaters and so on. The taxi industry, the personal vehicle industry, as well as the Bakkie Brigade. And then the licensed taverns and shebeens. Over and above that, the building industry is a huge sector. Home renovations and building, the internet cafes, catering, and I could just carry on. Any sector that you find in the formal sector is mirrored in the informal sector and very dynamic. The other thing about this that's very interesting is that most of the time the business and residence merges. And so you have, like on the top right there's a hair salon outside the Forum Home. In the bottom right there, that's a residence in Tembisa. Next to it is a Gorda outlet, and next to that is a pharmacy, all on this kind of residential premise. Here's the Gasi mechanic fixing the Mini in front of his house. And what this means is that you don't really have anywhere where you would say, well, this is a commercial center, this is an industrial center, and so on, because of this merging of business and personal. What it does also mean is that generally people are operating using their personal bank account for their business as opposed to a business bank account. So in essence, people often say, well, these businesses are unbanked, which is not true. They're in essence personally banked, or they will open a second personal bank account, use that for their business, and have another personal bank account for their personal business. And often you'll find 2 or 3 or 4 bank accounts per person for this purpose. The other thing is that the problem with this is generally in the townships is that proof of residence is a mass. People don't have any proof of residence, a utility bill, or so on. But even more of an issue is our addresses. Most of these places do not have a physical address. So there's a huge usage of IPIN, which I'll talk about just now, or PIN locations. So, you send someone your IPIN and then they would come. And WhatsApp has become the kind of platform people use to communicate, send locations, and so on. So if we look at this total landscape from a geographic perspective, there's about 530 plus townships in South Africa with around 30 million people residing there. So, 1 and 2 people residing in a township. It's become quite difficult to define what's a township because many of the historical townships have become much more like suburbs and spread into the surrounding suburbs or have new suburbs being built, which are fairly high income. But when we look at 530 townships, we're like, wow, what a logistic issue of trying to distribute to that. And what I've done in my work is build in essence, a database of key geographies. In essence, what we've been able to do, if you look at the heat map on the top right there, that's kind of where the population lives. We've narrowed this down into 80 key townships and 100 rural towns. So these 180 points, in essence, cover off 80% odd of our population. And when I talk about key townships and township clusters, we tend to go and look at what are the biggest townships and what's the next big township and so on. We look at townships individually. But if you looked on the right-hand side, that little table I've got there, what I mean by township clusters is that you will have often, like if you look at the East Rand cluster in yellow there, Katlehong, Vosloorus, Thokoza, and Spruitview are in essence individual separate townships. But if you go to that area, these townships are in essence merged. If you drive, you don't know where Katlehong ends and Vosloorus starts and Thokoza ends and so on and so forth. And if you look at that cluster represents about 10% of Gauteng's population within one area. So instead of having to look at a township by township, one can look at a cluster. Same with the one at the bottom in green, the Pretoria North Cluster, Soshanguve, Mabopane, Winterveld, Garangua, in essence represent one geographic space and one economic ecosystem, where people are trading within that space and buying and selling and so on. So when you look at this from this kind of perspective, wherever you want to go in KZN and Gauteng, whatever it might be, understanding this concept of these clusters, it becomes a lot easier, and there I have the 80 that we've kind of developed. Then the rural towns are very much kind of places like in the Eastern Cape, Alice, Bizana, Butterworth on that table. And what we've seen is that certain rural towns are dying as less and less economic activity, but many of them where there's a large rural population and a large population who live around that town are actually thriving and have become really important commercial centers. And they important commercial centers on two bases. On the one, if you go, for instance, to Pongola and KZN, or Burgersfort in Limpopo, you will find that there's a huge number of people who've moved from far outlying rural areas and are now living around those towns. So there's a big population. But more importantly, further outside of these places, people travel into these rural towns. And there are probably more than 2,500 rural towns. We've narrowed this down to 100 ones that exhibit this kind of serious commercial kind of center within these spaces. This is this rows and rows of shacks is the typical perception around this township economy and the majority of people in our country. And I often ask people showing this picture, what percentage of Africa are like this or informal? And I get numbers like 80%, 60%, 70%, because the media tells us that. And this is really a hugely inaccurate view of our townships. And as you'll see here on the left-hand side, actually formal dwellings, so brick and block or corrugated iron or tile roofs, represent 84% of our households, and informal is around 12%. And these are 2021 figures from SA General Household Survey. So the reality is that the vast majority, 84% of our households in South Africa in townships are formal dwellings. The other misconception is often that there are large households, large number of people living in these households. If you look on the right-hand side there, 23.3% of our households are one-person households, 18% are two-people households. So in essence, when we look at this sector, we're talking about a formal sector, 84% formal, 23% one-person, this brings in another whole thing, because these one-person households are generally living in back rooms that they're renting or that they own at the back of a property. And so when you look at a household, you're actually not looking at one building, you're actually looking at a number of buildings. And so you want to deliver to someone, you've got to find their back room. 50% of households are 2 to 4 people. So actually 70+% of households are small households. And this has changed dramatically over the last number of years, from large households in informal dwellings to today, small households in informal homes. Another thing is that Africa is the fastest urbanizing continent that we've ever seen, and in South Africa even more so. 85% of our country is now urban. And so in essence, what are we talking about? We're talking about, when we talk about the Kasinomic sector or the informal economy, we're talking about a formal urban space with few addresses and often different households on one property. And that of course brings its own challenges. But on the other hand, it also brings certain advantages. We're not talking such huge informality. We're not talking huge households having to squeeze together. I started off my life as a political activist, and I was in Soweto in the late 80s, and I took this picture of a forum house, and most every house in the townships in those days was this kind of forum house. This is the same street at the top there today, and you can see over in the kind of in front of the white, behind the white gate is the forum house today. And we've seen this incredible transformation within townships of formality, with people extending, building, adding on, going up a story and so on within the space. And the amazing thing is that this has all been built with people's own money. No home loans, no forms of credit are available for this building sector, for a number of reasons which I won't go into. It's just hugely impressive that these townships have been transformed in essence through incomes earned from informal sources to a large extent. And when we talk about our unemployment figures, we should put the word formal unemployment in front of those figures, because if you take real unemployment across both formal and informal, my argument is we're closer to about 12 or 15%. And this is again a reflection. You can see here, there's clearly more incomes able to transform these streets. When we look at the formal sector, particularly the retail and shopping centers and so on, this is in essence most people's experience of queues and queues and queues, particularly at month end. And particularly at retailers, grocery retailers, and particularly at banks and ATMs. And so, in kind of a tongue-in-cheek, in a world online, South Africa stood in line, and these queues dominate the sector, and people hate queues. So what we find now is that increasingly the informal sector has a better customer experience. You don't queue up at a Spazarette. You're getting a product at the same price as you're getting it at a ShopRite or a Pick n Pay, and so on, and it's in walking distance to your home. So there's been also this transformation within the informal sector of offering a better customer experience, while at the same time the formal sector has in many ways deteriorated in terms of experience. And what this has meant as well is that public transport can cost 10% of consumers' budget. And often you pay, if you're carrying groceries, you pay a penalty of a second seat. So this couple in this picture here will have to this is people's shopping experience. They're carrying all of that stuff, 12 kgs of maize meal, a bag of potatoes, and so on. When you climb into the taxi, you pay a second seat for that. So it actually increases it. Forget about the portability, convenience, and so on of carrying those kind of things. So what it has meant is that local neighborhood, formal and informal shopping is growing. So when I say formal and informal, your local U-Save that's in walking distance is increasingly where shopping is happening. Your local Spazarette and shopping in walking distance is growing, and so on. And so there's this move because of difficulty of transport and moving your groceries and stuff around, as well as the cost moving more locally. So as well is that what has grown is what I call Kasi high streets. And these pictures are what typical high streets. And these Kasi high streets are in essence the main arterials in the township where the taxis operate. And what has happened is that there's been a huge aggregation of commercial activity onto these high streets. Particularly from the informal sector. So there's a Spaza at the bottom left, Zama supermarket. That would be your typical store moved onto these main high streets. And so in essence, these main streets and junctions, this is really where the opportunities lie. And it becomes really important within those 80 townships or more if you want to follow these, understand where these are. And if you're wanting to have a distribution presence or a retail presence or anything like that, you're needing to understand these high streets. And here's an example just from Vugile Property Fund, rural and township shopping centers bucking the retail trend. This was after COVID. Malls and located in townships around commuter routes. These would be my high streets. Did better than their town shopping centers. So, just an indicator of what I'm talking about. And this is a map I did in Soshanguve north of Pretoria of mapping of MIDI wholesalers, those large cash and carry wholesalers. And you can see there the pink lines are basically the high streets. And on the high streets, you can see where the MIDI wholesalers are. If I put a Spaza Red map over this, you see even more little dots on all of these streets. And this is what I mean in terms of from a logistics perspective, understanding where these high streets are, mapping them, being present in those spaces, because this is where the bulk of activity is happening. This is a young guy called Rafilwe, and Rafilwe is owns a bakery in Soweto, and over COVID he had huge problems. He was selling about 500 loaves of bread a day, and suddenly he was selling none. So he moved his business offering onto Facebook Lite. Most people are on Facebook Lite, and invited people to send him, and he had his price list and offering on Facebook Lite. He invited people to send them his IPIN and on WhatsApp and their order. And he had these guys on the right-hand side going and delivering, sometimes walking up to 15 kilometers, delivering to those PIN locations, delivering buns and cakes and bread and so on and so forth, and moved his business from 500 loaves to about 2,000 loaves a day over that time. The irony, of course, is that what's killing him right now is Eskom. So he survived COVID only for load shedding to hurt him. But the point about this story is that increasingly we're seeing the usage of, in essence, Facebook Lite and WhatsApp as an e-commerce an offering, and using local delivery, whether it's pushing trolleys or as you'll see on the top left there, the grocery trader who used to sell from the taxi rank, lower footfall through taxi ranks, pushing these trolleys through the streets. The bottom right, that's a young guy with a motorbike who delivers fast food within the area around him. And so we're seeing also a real growth, not only of local neighborhood shopping, but of delivery happening at the same time. And this is going to accelerate. I'm involved in a business called Yebo Fresh that does online delivery, e-commerce of bulk products to Spaza shops, almost 6,000 Spaza shops in the townships, using a WhatsApp platform. There's others. Swiper on the bottom left is a young guy in Tembisa who started this delivery business, and so on and so forth. And the point is that the future is increasingly going to be this kind of ordering and delivery happening within these spaces. And this will only accelerate. The real inhibitor at this stage is the ability to pay without taking cash, with all the risks that go with it. But as we solve those issues, increasingly we'll find that this online and delivery is going to accelerate. Great, that's my story. Thank you very much. I'll take questions now.
Thank you, Gigi. You see there's some clapping going on here. We have real live clapping. It's very exciting. Thank you for that. We don't have any questions. Gerard just says thank you for an excellent presentation. I have two sort of comment sort of questions. First of all, thank you for explaining the different retail and food outlets and the numbers. I think it's very important to understand that, and as you say, not to be swept along with the dinner party stats that are bandied around, with respect. But I just feel that sometimes it's good to actually know what the numbers are. So thank you for sharing that. I love the fact that most of these people in these environments are, proudly South African with their products and things like that. And sort of thinking of it as sort of formal supply chains taking place in an informal space was how I was sort of hearing what you were saying. Are these business owners open to being sold to by large corporates or organizations, or do they tend to support other smaller businesses? I'm thinking banking, telecommunications, if there's a need, obviously. And Sylvia, I'll come to you, to your question just now. And then I wanted to ask one other quick question is the infrastructure supporting this environment? Obviously, Eskom, not so much, but water availability, are the municipalities supporting and recognizing the importance of this economy? Oh, you're on. Gigi, we can't hear you. Or is it me? Sorry, Gigi, we couldn't hear you there in that answer. I think you're on mute. We can't unmute you, I don't think. Sorry about that. You have to answer that all again. Yeah, you're on mute there. Can you see your unmute button? Cindy, are you able to unmute? Sorry, Gigi. Just give me a second while I go to my back end technical team, please.
I'm not sure.
Sorry, it's me interrupting you again. We still can't hear you. If you can you see we're unable to unmute you. Sorry. Do you want to just maybe come out and go back in again? Other way around. Yes, go out and come back in again. Unless you can see where your mute button is. I can see it and I just want to click on it, but it's not working. I'm sorry. Maybe just leave and come back in again if that's possible. Sorry, everyone. We will get to Sylvia's question. Oh, you can't hear me either. Okay. Sorry, everyone. If you don't mind just being a bit patient, we'll see if he can log off and log back in again. And thanks for the question, Anthony. A reminder while we're waiting is that the next session will start at 3:20. We've got a 20-minute break after this. And then we're going to be going into our panel discussion with Martin Bailey and Gavin Kelly and Sandra Hertenbach. And so stay with us for that. I may just reach out to Gigi on ask Cindy to maybe give him a call. Maybe he's got a connection issue. She's just waiting for him backstage. Don't forget to please put in the polls your responses and how you feel about the presenters so that we know what you like for next year. Hopefully next year we'll be able to be back in live having our spring conference, but it does allow for people to not have to spend lots of money on travel to be able to access the best parts of our annual conference. So if you give us feedback, then SAPEX will do what you need. I think what we'll do is we'll probably go into our break now, and we'll ask Gigi to join a table, and I will keep his the questions here that you've asked, and then I will reach out to you with the answers. I'm sorry we weren't able to have that discussion, but are you happy that we do that? I think we'll do that, and we'll set up a table. Thanks, everyone. Sorry about the dodgy end, but let's see if we can pick up the discussion on the tables. Thanks.